Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Today's guest is Jerry Gray. And over the past 2 decades, he has been living and working in China, where he has also cycled nearly 30,000 kilometers across the country. And prior to his time in China, he served for 10 years as a police officer with Metropolitan Police in London, and later became the general manager of a division of Chubb Security in Australia. He holds a master's degree in cross cultural change management, and he also runs a YouTube channel named Jerry's Take on China, where he talks about China using his first hand experience of everyday life. He offers a grounded perspective that challenges common myths and misconceptions about China. So, welcome, Jerry. Great to have you here. How have you been?
Thank you, Ali. It's great to be here and say hello to all of your audience. It's good to see a different audience, and I hope this does get to a slightly wider audience than my own audience. I tend to be a little contrary about China, particularly in terms of Western narrative and Australian media. I'm an Australian citizen. I was born in the UK but lived 17 years in Australia as well. So I do have a love for the country, and I get very upset when I see how badly misinformed Australians are about the country where I now live, which is China, because I was one of them. The day I arrived in China, it took about 2 hours for me to realize, oh, we've been misinformed. This is not what I expected. That was back in 2004. And it hasn't got worse. It's got progressively better every single year. And pretty much everything that we now read in Australian media, pretty much everything is misinformation. Quite often, there's a small grain of truth which is then misinterpreted, or maybe it's not misinterpretation, maybe it's deliberate misinformation or disinformation. In the case of some people, I know this for a fact. The Australia's ABC is one of them, and I know for a fact that they do disinform about us because they're journalists here. The new one, they have a new one here now who may be different, but their journalist here for a long period of time, a guy called Bill Birtles, was constantly misinforming, and he was living here. He knew the story. He knew different. He was deliberate disinformation about China. And so I just kind of highlight what China is, what China does, what China says it's going to do, and then compare that with what it's actually doing. And it turns out that 99% of the time I'm right, and the ABC and Murdoch Press and Channel 9 and Channel 7 are wrong. So, from that perspective, we're still being misinformed, even though they keep getting it wrong. This coming collapse, this military expansion, these it's been completely debunked now that China has offended any human rights. It doesn't lock up Uyghurs. It hasn't illegally occupied Tibet. All of these things are completely debunked, but people are still hearing them sometimes on a daily basis. So you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth.
I think, yeah, could be organized propaganda here. But just before I go into that, I have a very small audience. I only have 600 subscribers, so I'm not sure you're going
That's
to reach a wider audience through me.
Well,
But
it
no,
doesn't
I want
matter,
to
Ali. It
thank
really
you for
doesn't
coming
matter.
to my channel.
Of course, when you invited me on your show,
Yeah,
I looked at that. There was a time a few years ago, it wasn't that long ago, I had 600. I started with zero, and it's been it's less than 4 years, about 3.5 years. I've got 50,000 now, which I think is a
that's
good
great.
audience. And it's constantly
It
growing.
is.
Every day
Yeah,
I wake up and find a few have been removed.
great.
YouTube does that to anyone who is not pro the narrative, whatever the narrative happens to be. If I was talking about Iran, if I was talking about Venezuela,
Right.
if I was talking about North Korea, I'd be
Yeah,
suppressed. I'm being suppressed
right.
by YouTube. There's no question about that. Many people have told me that they subscribe to me and then find themselves unsubscribed. Yet I've still got
Hmm.
50,000 subscribers. So something is going right. I'm getting more. But even yesterday, I was sitting here. I hit 50,000 about a few days ago. And I was
Right.
sitting here watching to see when 50.1K came up. And it just kept going down. It went from 99 down to
Yeah.
96. Then it went to 97 and then 95. And I woke up this morning, it's 103. So somehow I'm having people removed at the same time as more people are coming on. So it is constantly, it's two step forward and half a step back almost every day. So yeah, the audience is just a different thing, but yours is a different audience to the audience that I have. And that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that. You were very humble. So why China? Why did you choose to go and live in China?
Good question. I didn't choose China. I was made redundant. I worked for Chubb Security, the biggest at the time, the biggest security company, second biggest in the world or third biggest in the world. I
Yeah.
think ADT, Wackenhut, and maybe a couple of others now, but Group 4 Security might be. But Chubb was a very big security company, and it was taken over by an organization called UTC, United Technologies Corporation. They are part of the military industrial complex, as is Chubb. I don't think people realize, I knew this at the time, but Chubb, apart from its security, has a lot of sonar, radar, that kind of thing. And one of the reasons Chubb bought into Australia, I was working for a different security company before it became Chubb, so I was part of a takeover. One of the reasons they came into Australia was to work on the Collins class submarines way back
Mm.
20, no, more than 25, 40 years ago. When the Collins class were being built, they needed radar, they needed sonar, and Chubb wanted that contract. But in order to get that contract, they needed a presence in Australia. So they bought a security company called Wormold, and I worked for Wormold, and I became part of Chubb shortly afterwards. Um, there were when UTC, which is now part of Raytheon, I think these things change all the time.
Yeah.
But last time I looked, UTC was part of Raytheon, the missile manufacturer,
Yeah.
and they took over, and they didn't need people like me. I
Mm.
was basically lowly qualified in terms of academic qualifications. I didn't have a master's degree back then, and they like their senior managers to have master's degree. And in Australia, I was without a doubt a senior manager. The only person I reported to was the managing director of Australia and the
Mm.
board in London until UTC took over. And so the first meeting that we had, they made me redundant, basically. I was quite happy with that. It's 17 years service. They continuous service from the day that I arrived in Wormald. In fact, I didn't even arrive in Wormald. I worked for a company called MSS, which became Wormald, which became Chubb. So it just all kept changing. And the once they made me redundant, I just decided that I didn't really want to go back on the slippery slope. You know, this the greasy pole to reach higher office in a corporation. It was just not my style, and I decided not to do that. So I decided to teach and travel. I was separated from my wife. My kids were grown up. What am I going to do now? I'll just go around the world, and I'll go to South America and I'll teach English there and I'll get paid, and then I'll move somewhere else and get paid, so I can live a life like a gypsy and moving around the country with this portable skill. So I got myself a teaching certificate, and off I went. The first job I applied for happened to be in China, and it was the first job I got. I only made one application for a job in basically in my life since being made redundant. I applied for one job, and it was in Zhongshan, the city where I am now. I'd never heard of Zhongshan. I didn't really have any ambitions to be in China. And I got this contract in October 2004 for an 8 month. I had to finish at the end of the school year in June the next year. And they asked me to, about halfway through, they asked me to expand the contract for a year. And then the next thing I knew, I was thinking, I don't want to go home just yet. So I decided to stay. And I went
Okay.
looking for a job, and that's when I met my wife. I got a job here. I didn't have to apply. I walked into a language center and said, "Hey, I'm a teacher," and they went, "Oh, what are you doing tonight? Can you help us out? We've got 2 hours tonight, and we're looking for a teacher." I was, "Oh, I can help you out,"
Sure.
and they paid me an hourly rate for a couple of months. I was still working in my other job, so I was working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and then I would do a couple of hours in the evening at this place, and then maybe a couple of hours on a Saturday or a Sunday, and they liked me and I liked them, and I stayed there for another few months. There, after my contract finished, I had to find a new apartment. I had to live on my own effectively. I lost my all the perks that I had with an Australian contract. Suddenly, it started to become a real life, which just wasn't ready to go home yet. And I met the manager there, and we've been married 15 years. 2009, we got married.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. So how did you find the transition from Australia to China? Uh, how did the people receive you in China? Because we
Well, to
see
this
the
day,
reason I'm
I've
asking
never.
is because, sorry, I'll just add on to that. The reason I'm asking is because we have an influx of Chinese students coming to universities and colleges
Yeah.
over here in Australia. So education is one of the top 5 or 6 industries in Australia. So we get a lot of Chinese students here, and whenever you interact with them, they're very humble, very uh, open to talk and all that kind of stuff. Haven't had any bad experience with Chinese students, but you sort of tend to read uh, in the press negative things about China and Chinese people, and again human rights stuff, and especially the Uyghur, which we'll touch upon later, because I'm also keen to understand whether that's made up or that or there's any ounce of truth in that. But how did you find the reception in China? Were the people more welcoming to you over there as a
I've
foreigner?
Yeah, I could probably count in 20 years on one hand, and I doubt if I'd get to five, the number of times I've met anybody who wasn't extremely polite and nice to me. I can. I'm trying to think right now as you say this, and I remember a guy when we were cycling and we wanted to cross a river, and there was a ferry port, and this guy wouldn't let us on the ferry with our bikes, but wouldn't explain why not. And when we tried to ask questions, he just closed the window on us and walked away. And for what a rude, anyway, that that's one. And honestly, I can't think of any others. I probably could if I sat here and made notes for a while. I might get up to four or five. Chinese people are not rude. It's as simple as that. They are welcoming. They don't care. Even if I'm an American, and you know what America is doing to China right now with its trade restrictions and its massive amount of disinformation, they don't care about that. They don't blame the American people. They've got Japan, and as a nation, China dislikes Japan because it's
Yeah,
never apologized and it's never even acknowledged, let alone apologized. It's writing out of history what it did. And we know
yeah,
now from the movies, these are not Hollywood, these are real stories. The
correct.
Nanjing Massacre, the 731. I've known about these for years. I've actually been to the 731 museum in Harbin, just south of Harbin. And this is where they did, it was like an Auschwitz style camp where they did human experiments. And now they're rewriting history to say that it was a biological lab that they were doing research into things like anthrax. No, they weren't. They were giving anthrax to Chinese people. And now
Yeah,
Chinese people don't hate Japanese. They hate Japan.
yeah,
But I actually had Japanese students here. I have Korean students, or used to have when I was a teacher. I worked for a while in an international school, and I had lots of students. And you had Japanese and Koreans in my class. There was never any animosity there. It doesn't boil down to personalities. Uh, it boils down to we don't like your country, but you're all right. And
yeah,
if I ever ask, I have students who say to me, "Oh, I hate Japan." I say, "Well, have you ever met a Japanese person?" "Oh, yeah, I know lots." "What do you think of them?" "Oh, they're really nice." That's how they
yeah,
are. They don't think in the same way that a Westerner would think. And I'm not sure about you and how long you've lived in Australia and whether you're assimilated to Australian culture, but Australians think like Anglo Saxons, generally speaking. And Anglo Saxons think if someone smites me, I'll smite them back, and it's
right.
biblical. It goes back thousands of years. It is a culture of warlike culture. For me, growing up in the northeast of England, we fought the Vikings, we fought the Romans, we fought the Anglo-Saxons. I probably was an Anglo-Saxon, but the Brits fought the Anglo-Saxons
Yeah,
and ended up being pushed to Wales or up to Scotland.
yeah,
And we created borders and boundaries so that these things exist. So China is not like that at all. They do have and have historically had internal struggles, but they've
yeah,
never had external struggles. They've only been invaded. They were invaded by the Japanese. Before that, they were invaded by the British, the Russians, the French, the
yeah,
Italians, the Germans, and the Americans. And they've been invaded. And now they have a fairly powerful military. They're saying it's not going to happen again. And this is one of the
yeah,
big tender points with Taiwan. I can very briefly tell you, China will never, ever invade Taiwan. Now,
yeah,
forgetting the pedantry and the semantics about that, China can't invade its own province, and the United Nations recognizes
Yeah.
Taiwan itself recognizes it's a province
Yeah.
of China. And the political differences separate these two things, but China will not invade because it doesn't want to fight brother against brother, cousin against cousin. What it wants to do is Taiwan to come back. And what it's prepared to do is leave Taiwan exactly as it is on the status quo because Taiwan is a province of China. The moment Taiwan says, we want independence, that is when China will defend Taiwan from being taken away.
Yeah.
Now, think about it like that. It's not attacking Taiwan to take it over, it's defending something from being taken away. And they will do the same. Australia would do the same if somebody tried to declare independence in Tasmania
Yeah.
and or any of your states, any of our states, if they were to declare independence from the federation, then the country would say this is not going to happen. That's exactly what China is going to do. So that's the way China view it. I've never had any ill feeling from anyone being a foreigner. I've never experienced it. I know plenty of African Americans. I even know Africans. I used to be a teacher trainer, and I used to train teachers, and there was a lot of them came from Africa to teach English in China, and I used to train them. And I've never yet met one of them who's experienced any racism. What you do get is what I would describe as benign racism. It's curiosity. It's you're
Yeah.
different from me. Let's have a look. Let's
Correct.
find out. And you might get someone walking up to, if you've got lots of curly hair or something, someone will walk
Yeah.
up and say, "Can I touch your hair?" It's different. That's all it is. And yes, you could describe that as racism, but I describe it more as curiosity. I've never really felt anything other than curiosity. But sometimes, if your worldview of China is negative, you may feel hostility when it's really just curiosity. And
Right.
I would say, I mean, literally, honestly, in 20 years, I can only think of one experience of a very rude person. I've never seen road rage in China. I'm sure it happens. I've never seen it. You don't see street crime in China. I'm sure it happens. I've just never seen it. You don't see shoplifting in China. And, when I was in Australia and I drove into, say, I used to live in Des Moines and I'd drive into the city center. For a while, I lived in Five Dock and I would drive into the city center. You'd see road rage, you'd see criminal activity. You don't see it. There is very, very little graffiti. There is no criminal damage. There's hardly any litter because it gets cleaned up every single day anyway. There's just the things that you kind of come to expect in Australia and the
Yeah.
UK don't exist here. So there is
UK is
that to
much
consider.
worse. Yeah, UK is much worse in many ways compared to Australia. But I was in Singapore a few years ago, and I was surprised. It was probably a cultural shock. I was surprised to see no graffiti, no littering, no road rage, or no shoplifting. In Australia, you do tend to see that. Not often, but once in a while, probably once or twice a year, you do see shoplifting and road rage. But
Well, you probably
in
don't see it
Singapore, I
because
was
you're not
amazed.
looking for
Everybody
it.
was very polite. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
the
I'm guessing
difference
it's
between you and I, Ali, is that I look for it, or used to, and I'm conscious of what a crime looks like when it's taking place. I was trained to do that. It's an
right.
observation technique that we have. I've been trained in interview techniques, observation techniques. I've been trained in
Mm.
all kinds of different things. As a police officer, you do, and then I worked in the security industry for a long time. And although my division was different, I worked for what they call the protective services, where they have the security guards, and I took part in the training of that as a trainer rather than as a participant. And I was actually, when I very first started with the company, I was a security guard. So I've got this background where I kind of look for things and I see them. I don't see them in China. Simple. It just doesn't
Mhm.
happen. If you take a look at any
Mhm.
train station, I challenge you in a train station to find graffiti. You can't. It's not there.
Yeah.
And that's not because of surveillance. It's not because of a massive police presence. It's a culture that doesn't exist. People here don't do that stuff. That's why it is. People don't damage other people's property.
Mhm. Mhm. That's informative. But can you think of a scenario where Taiwan would want independence from China? Oh,
No, only because the Americans would do it. I mean, the Americans say that they adhere to the status quo. There are three joint communiques. There, I mean, the Shanghai. We can go back to the Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Declaration, all these things that said Taiwan belongs to China. Then I think it was 1971, the United Nations recognized China, the People's Republic of China, and Taiwan as a province of it. And that's written into the United Nations
Yeah,
statement. So the United States say they recognize one China, they recognize that Taiwan is part of one China. That's what they say. And then they arm Taiwan to defend itself against China, against a threat that's not actually there. They
yeah,
create the threat. Now, they have spent literally billions and billions of dollars bad mouthing China, not just in Taiwan. And I'm not kidding you here. There are two acts of Congress, one of which allows for 500 million a year, and one allows for 300 million a year. Now, one of them is a 3 year act, and one of them is a 5 year act. So we're literally talking billions just on those two acts. Now, there are others, but those two acts of Congress allocate 800 million a year to badmouth China, for negative reporting on China. Negative reporting on the BRI is one, negative reporting on China is the other. Now, they're not interested in the truth. If you're going to write the truth, no one in America has ever offered me money to write a story. Many people in China have, but not a
mm,
single person in America has ever offered me money. I've been published for free in Australia. You don't get paid. I've never been paid.
yeah,
I'm a writer. I'm a freelance journalist. I have I would say, more than 100 articles against my name in Global Times, in People's Daily, in China Daily, in Guanming Weekly. These are very famous Chinese English language newspapers. I've been written in Chinese. I've got articles that have millions, literally millions of views. Yet not one Western mainstream media has ever approached me to ask me to write for them. Not one. Why not? Because they don't want my story. So why don't they want it? Because they can't get paid for it. They can't get paid for the other side of the story. Now, the fact is, if I were to write for The Guardian, for example, a million people would see it, and probably 500,000 or 700,000 respond to it to say, this is crap. This guy's talking out of his butt. They would not accept what I have to say. And that's an interesting thing. When people don't accept me, they just call me names. And this is what I find on my YouTube channel. And you will get some of this in your comment section. You'll get someone come to you and say, that guy must be paid by the CCP. I'm not. I've never been paid by anyone for my opinions. I get paid when I write an article. Simple as that. So it's a little strange to me that this does happen. We've got massive amounts of paid misinformation, and then you've got probably a couple of hundred of people like me who are not paid. I've monetized my YouTube, and I get paid a little bit on YouTube. It's a few $100s a month. That's it. My biggest month ever is less than $1,000. So it's not enough to live on by any means. It's not even enough to pay taxes on. But it's a strange situation that we live in. You're paid for misinformation, and why would Taiwan? Your original question: why would Taiwan declare independence?
yeah,
Because the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a cutout of the CIA, it was created,
mm,
and this is not conspiracy theory. This is a fact. It was created to legitimize the payments and openly make payments that the CIA used to make covertly. So the National Endowment for Democracy is basically the CIA's paymaster, and they put millions into Taiwanese democracy. Now, China has a great form of democracy. Taiwan didn't. And the KMT, who went to Taiwan from the end of the Civil War, were actually a military force. They had military curfews, they had martial law. Anybody who wants to research this can do so. Look up the words the White Terror, the White Terror, Taiwan. This is where martial law and anyone who opposed the status quo of the KMT at that time was either put into prison or executed. or sometimes just murdered. Now, this happened over a long period, 20 years or more, until the Americans came in and said, we're going to put money into this, but they didn't put money into the KMT. Now the KMT is America's enemy because the KMT at that time couldn't be seen as the Democratic Party, so they created the DPP. And the DPP is an American creation to allow for what they call this two-party state and allow for an authorized opposition. So the KMT are in opposition. KMT would actually like the status quo. The DPP, to a point, like the status quo, but many of them would like independence. Well, it's not going to happen. Simple as that. It's not going to happen. And the moment it does happen, you'll see Chinese warships going around Taiwan saying, no one's coming in here. No flights are
Yeah,
coming in here. There'll be jets flying over. Taiwan's only 130 kilometers off the coast.
yeah,
Parts of Taiwan Island is not one island, it's a series of many islands, and parts of them are only 3 kilometers off the coast of a city called Xiamen in the province of Fujian. So parts of them are only 3 kilometers away. And the US has military soldiers on that island. It's called Kinmen Island. The US has a military presence there. Now, that is completely contrary to every agreement that Reagan made, Carter made, and the original one was Nixon in Shanghai. So all of these agreements have been offset by something that Congress did, which proves that you cannot trust an American president, not just Trump, any American president. Whatever the American president signs and handshakes on can go back to America, and the American Congress can say, we're overriding that. So, what's the point in doing a deal with an American president if the Congress says we don't like that? So, Congress, after Richard Nixon signed this agreement, and then it was Carter who promised to pull all American troops and stop sending money for weapons to Taiwan, they wrote something called the Taiwan Relations Act.
yeah,
And the Taiwan Relations Act allows Congress to override anything that the president decided. That's how trustworthy America are. China has never breached any agreements. There's no evidence that they ever have. People say they have, but there's no evidence. Allegations aren't proof or evidence. So that's why I think there are a few people who want independence. They're mostly American. Some of them, believe it or not, because Japan occupied for about 60 years, Japan occupied Taiwan. So many people are kind of sympathetic towards Japan. They have Japanese grandfathers or
yeah,
great grandfathers. So, and again, this is another case. People don't seem to realize this. Japan was given so Taiwan was given to Japan after Japan had invaded mainland China and taken a British named Port Arthur, in the city of Dalian away from the Russians. So the Russians were occupying Dalian. The British had occupied it before the Russians took it over. Japan invaded it, took it off the Russians, and as part of the settlement, America gave them Taiwan. Go figure that. Why do you think China
yeah,
wants a defensive military? Look what's been happening in its history. A lot of people don't seem to
yeah,
realize this history. They talk about the 100 years of humiliation. People say, oh, yeah, I know about that. But they don't. They don't really understand it. The fact is, China was subjugated. There were massive amounts. We're not talking Hong Kong and Macau. We're talking about massive tracts of land. Qingdao was German. Wuhan was German and Italian and Russian and British. Chongqing even had a concession in there. These concessions, Shanghai is a huge one. The whole city of Shanghai was split into different countries, and it was managed by those countries. The international concession was American. America said we never colonized. They did. The international concession of Shanghai was an American concession. So American law applied there. The British concession, British law, and the French concession, French law. Chinese people were not allowed into their own city without authority. And when they went in there, they were subject to a foreign country's rules and laws. Wow. What would you do if that happened to your country? Now, I know that you're from Pakistan, and your country has been through this with partition and India, and you fought. That's what you do. In partition 1947, I don't know how many millions died, but it was a lot. You died fighting for your own country. That's what China
even
will do.
before that, from 1880 to 1920, 165 million of us were murdered, and that's an official figure. Think about it: 40 years, 165 million, and those were the extractive practices of the British imperialists. They
Yep.
would take our food, our grain, our cotton, whatever we would produce, on the pretext that, oh, you're going to give it to the rebels. Rebels were the freedom fighters. So at that time, the term terrorist hadn't been invented, but they
Rebels.
had invented the term rebels, thugs, or anarchist. I think there was a 1919 act against anarchy. So
Mm.
they would just come and take raid villages and all that kind of stuff. 165 million. That study's been done by three universities, one in Australia, one in, I think, in France, one in I think South America. So it's a combined study. It was fascinating. So we knew about it because our own historians told us about uh,
Mm.
how many of us were killed fighting for freedom. But yeah, people outside certain regions don't really know the suffering of other people, which is why uh, obviously China was colonized, then the Opium Wars. So that never again mentality, I can understand where China is coming from in terms of
Yeah.
trying to defend its own territory. It's like if you ask Hawaii to secede from America, and then you start supplying weapons to Hawaii, or to New Mexico, start supplying
Well,
weapons to New
this
Mexico,
is
how would
exactly
America
right.
react? Yeah,
Yeah, if China was to supply weapons, now China can't even supply weapons to Cuba. Cuba is a sovereign nation. It happens to
yeah,
be just off the coast of Florida, but it's a sovereign nation. China
yeah,
can't without an act of war from America.
yeah,
Try doing it to Hawaii, which is a state of America. There
yeah,
are people in Hawaii who want separation, but
yeah,
China has never interfered. China has never done to America what America does to China on a daily basis. So that's the difference. You know, people complain about China being aggressive. Well, if China wants to be aggressive, they would be funding separatists. They would be
yeah,
funding militia. And Texas has a separation lobby, as does New Mexico, as does Arizona, as does California, as does Hawaii, as does Alaska. China has never gone into any of those places and tried to organize and help them and arm them and fund them. It doesn't do that, and yet it could. And it could because it would be tit for tat. Everything that America
correct.
does is a confession. Everything that America alleges is a confession. They allege China does something because they are or have done it in the past. So that's
I think
that's
they
why I
are
think there's a lot of fear about China because America creates that fear.
correct. I think there are peace-loving people in America, just that they're not at the top, or not at the level where they can make foreign policy decisions. And again, foreign policy decisions are not made keeping public's interest at heart. They are made to enrich certain parties. Military-industrial
If
complex
you're in
is true.
America and you
Yeah,
are slightly contrarian to the narrative, then you will never make public office of any
yeah,
sort. You would be every single person who is non-conforming is either disgraced. If they're disgraced by, oh, this guy's a pedophile and here's the evidence here, it's all allegations, but and it may be true, it may not be true, but they're disgraced. They're incarcerated for something that they is said they've done, or they're assassinated. Anybody who is
mm,
contrarian has been assassinated. And I'm not talking about Charlie Kirk here, who's probably the most conformist of all of them. But Charlie Kirk was starting to look at Israel and say, well, we're not too sure about this, and he's assassinated. Now, who assassinated him is a huge story, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I don't believe that the story we're getting is the true story. So let's leave that one alone. But look at Martin Luther King, look at Malcolm X. They honor these heroes after they've been assassinated. And these
yeah,
are the people who could lead America to a different future. And the
yeah,
reason they're assassinated is because they could lead America to a different future.
yeah. No, that's true. That's true. I mean, you see all that rhetoric, warlike rhetoric coming from America. J.D. Vance addressing China's in derogatory terms and saying just before election, December 2024, that China is the real threat. We need to focus on China. Russia is not a threat, which is okay. I can understand that. Uh, Donald Trump, for many years, has been saying that China, they are not nice people, they are not friends, they are our enemies. Joe Biden during the election debate, calling Xi Jinping a thug and someone who hates democracy, and Steve Bannon openly going on MSNBC and other television shows saying that we are at war with China. And I found one of his statements really hilarious. I'm not sure how he became the vice president of Goldman Sachs. In one of his statements, he said that you will see that after the end of this trade war, all the trading routes will be routed around China. China will lose badly and its economy will crush. And we've been in this trade war for over 6 months now and nothing has happened. China hasn't collapsed. America's been calling China to make a deal. But yeah, I mean, I don't think America holds any cards over here. I know trade war doesn't really benefit anybody. Both parties lose, but it depends on how willing you are to take the fight longer. I think Chinese probably in their blood. They've got a lot more fight than Americans thought they would, and I think China holds most of the cards. The rare earths stuff is really powerful in China's favor. China's technological advancements, especially in EVs, renewable energy, and with this chip restriction, China has been able to manufacture its own chips now, which is putting Nvidia in danger because Nvidia used to see China as its biggest market. Almost 50% of Nvidia revenue was forecasted to come from China. But now China is saying, okay, we've got our own chips now. So Nvidia's Jensen Huang's probably not panicking, but he's aware that there might be a concern when it comes to future revenues. So all this is sort of backfiring. But again, nobody wins in a trade war. Both parties lose, and there was no need to go down that route. But Americans, I think they are heavy-handed, in my opinion. But when Chinese people see those rhetoric coming from American politicians and government officials, how do they react, or do they even react?
They do. They do. Um, Actually, we've seen the reaction. We've seen the reaction. It's been a very positive reaction from China, and you mentioned some of them. What happened? First of all, China was restricted in because of its human rights record. Okay, we can go down the rabbit hole of human rights, and I can assure you, China is not restricting human rights. China had a problem in Xinjiang, and we'll come back to that problem later and what they did about it. But China had a problem in Xinjiang. America capitalized on this problem and said, we don't want any Xinjiang products. So they banned Xinjiang tomatoes and they banned Xinjiang cotton. What the rest of the world didn't know was that the tomato lobby in America was lobbying the administration at the time, we're going all the way back to Obama here, was lobbying the administration to ban foreign tomatoes because their industry was struggling. They also banned tomatoes from Mexico over human rights issues. Now, the real human rights issues are the tomato farmers and the cotton farmers inside of America who were literally using slave labor to pick their tomatoes and their cotton, and they were using undocumented migrant labor. So they were an inefficient and unprofitable industry, and the only way for tomatoes and cotton to become profitable was to ban imports. But that would go against the World Trade Organization rules. So America had to manufacture a reason, and they manufactured human rights issues. It got worse. It got worse. But that's how it all started. Now, SubPIMA. SubPIMA is an organization inside of America that promotes the use of American made, American grown cotton, American made cotton products. The CEO of SubPIMA became the CEO of the organization that was responsible for checking on human rights abuses in the cotton industry. The same guy. Within weeks of him becoming the leader of this organization, allegations started against Xinjiang Uyghurs. Allegations started against China and how they were abusing Xinjiang Uyghurs. He'd never been to Xinjiang. His own organization, Better Cotton Industries, BCI, where he was the CEO or chairman of, his own organization had been for 9 years inside of Xinjiang and had never once reported a single problem. And he closed it down in China on the basis of we can't keep it open because there are trade sanctions against China now. Now, let's reverse cycle this one a little bit. There are trade sanctions against China. They created the trade sanctions and then closed down the overseeing body because the overseeing body didn't find anything but would be in breach of the sanctions if they went looking for it. Oh, so now you have no oversight body because the organizer of the oversight body in China is the CEO of the oversight body in America. Wow, nobody knew about this. It was BBC created a story called China's Tainted Cotton. And I wrote an article which went viral at the time. I mean, it had hundreds of thousands of views called BBC's Tainted View of China's Cotton, and it was very long. It was an extended one, and it is available on Medium still. I don't use Medium anymore, but it's still out there. And it was the BBC's view of China's tainted cotton, and I exposed all of this. I itemized this, name, dates, everything is all there. The information is there, and it's very, very easy to look up. This is true. So when we talk about human rights issues in Xinjiang and we link them to sanctions and restrictions, we are linking them on spurious, very highly spurious information. Here's a statistic. 87% of all the cotton in China is picked in Xinjiang. They do grow cotton in other places, but most of it, 90%, is grown in Xinjiang. 90% of that is harvested automatically. They even have harvesters that don't have drivers. This is not people picking cotton by the thousands. China produces 10 times more cotton in Xinjiang than the United States produced in the 1860s when they were using 100% slave labor. So 10 times more cotton, and they're not using slave labor.
Yeah.
That's as simple as that.
Yeah.
It is 100%, almost 100% automated. And I know this for a fact. I've been there, I've seen it. I've been and seen the cotton fields, and I know for a fact it is mostly automated. There is one particular brand of cotton, brand, is that the right word? Species, where it's best picked by hand because it has a long, I don't know what you call this, long stem, long grain. I don't know. You pick it, and if you do it by machine, it leaves half the cotton there, and it's better picked by hand. And the people who pick that are paid a lot of money because this is a difficult job to do, and they are skilled at doing it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So the restrictions, the trade restrictions. What does China do about these? People in China, when this happened, said, "Okay, we have a market of 1.4 billion people. Any company that says we're not buying Chinese cotton, finished.
Hmm.
1.4 billion people just say, I'm not going to buy from that company." So we had a couple of companies when they closed their doors. So any
Right.
company in China that restricts Chinese businesses is going to get exposed and then will suffer in their markets. So a lot of corporations now. America doesn't have cotton corporations here, but H&M, those kind of
Yeah.
massive chain stores, which are not American, I understand. One is Japanese. I can't remember their names. Uniqlo,
Uniqlo,
yeah,
Uniqlo,
Uniqlo and H&M
H&M,
are the two big
Zara.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Europeans. Yeah.
Zara didn't get the problems, but H&M did. And there was
Yeah.
one H&M store in Chengdu where the owner of the shopping center just basically said to them, "You have to move out. I'm ending your lease." They had to
Yeah.
close down. Simple. So that's what happens
Yeah.
if a corporation says we're not going to do business with you. Now, here's another interesting thing. Inside of Xinjiang, they have Marriott hotels, Hilton hotels, they have KFCs, they have McDonald's, they have Tesla, they have. You think about any top brand American name
Yeah.
that has gone global, they're in Xinjiang. What are they doing in Xinjiang when the
Yeah.
region is supposed to be oppressed? They're in Xinjiang making
Correct.
money. Which country does John Deere, the biggest agricultural corporation in the
Yeah.
world, make most of its money? It's here in China. So you can see what's happening here. The reality doesn't match the words, but that doesn't stop Congress writing laws. And when Congress write laws, media writes stories. When media writes stories, academics do research. And at the end of the day, they come up with a formulated conclusion that China is bad. It's not.
Right. 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 Yeah. Uh, So this latest TikTok deal, I know the rhetoric was that TikTok is a Chinese app, which it is not. It is owned by some Chinese companies, but it's not a Chinese government app. What do you make of it? I mean,
Well,
what's
the
the real reason?
CPC,
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah,
CPC, they're not called the CCP, despite what your media will tell you. They're
yeah,
called the CPC, they're the Communist Party of China, not the Chinese Communist Party. The party belongs to the country, not the country belongs to the party. And so CCP is a derogatory term. The Communist Party of China has no interest in Americans what they're doing. Now, yes, there could be issues where if there is a criminal law, the Americans criminal act, the Americans could be asked by Chinese government for information relating to that.
yeah,
And let me go back again. We'll always go back in history to what started this. In 2008 and then again in 2013, there were massive protests in Xinjiang and Tibet. Now, why were there protests there? And it's not because Xinjiang and Tibet were evil places run by this evil CCP overlords or anything like that. It's because somebody from outside, Americans, were spending lots of money. Now, most people don't realize this, but Xinjiang actually shares a border with Afghanistan. So for 20 years, Americans were in Afghanistan and they were training, and they were doing this in Pakistan as well. They were
yeah,
training Uyghurs on terrorism, and they call it counterterrorism. They're training them on counterterrorism. What they're doing is they're arming them, funding them, training them, and sending them back. And they're coming back as indoctrinated terrorists. They're not coming back as trained counterterrorism operations. They're coming back as insurgents. And that's what America was doing. They did the same thing. This is historically proven. They did the same thing
yeah.
for Tibet. They actually parachuted a load of people back into Tibet who were trained in Colorado. Again, absolutely 100% not a conspiracy theory. These have been documented, written about, and are now in the open air so anyone can find this out.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
not
what
conspiracy
happened?
because I'm a Pakistani. I know how CIA agents trained Mujahideens to fight Russians, and when Mujahideens and Osama bin Laden turned
Yeah,
against
well, Osama bin Laden
America,
was
they were
their
termed
friend.
terrorists. Yeah,
There's
yeah. I
that
mean, we
very
know that
famous
because they
article.
set up training camps in Pakistan.
Yes.
So we used to
Yeah.
see
So they were doing
Americans
the
quite
same thing for
often. Yeah,
Uyghurs. Now they're
yeah.
recognizing Uyghurs in Syria. There are several hundred Uyghurs in Syria who are saying, we are going to take Xinjiang back. Well,
Mhm.
those guys are being infiltrated in through places like Kazakhstan. Do you remember there was an attempted color revolution in Kazakhstan?
Yeah,
Kazakhstan shares a huge border with Xinjiang, and Xinjiang shares a border with Pakistan too. So we're going through this process with history in mind. And these people are coming into China now. They're coming back to China, but getting their weapons back, getting their money back, getting their funding is a little more difficult. And China is very, very strict on how they communicate with each other. So going back to the TikTok story, which is how we started this, years ago, there were two series of very, very serious riots, protests, acts of terrorism, insurgency, and sedition in both of these places, Xinjiang and in Tibet. China clamped down really hard on it. No question about that. And I'm not gonna say there weren't innocent people arrested, there weren't innocent people hurt by this. I'm certain there would have been. But they clamped down hard and they stopped it and they instigated massive security controls. And I've been through these security controls. In 2014, I was in Xinjiang, and you couldn't go from you still can't go from one town to the next without checking into the town. You
yeah,
go into certain housing estates, you have to go through facial recognition and security just to get into your gardens where you live. That kind of security is kind of oppressive. But when you talk to the people there, they say it's much safer than it used to be. There were terrorist bombs, there were terrorist attacks, there were knife fights. Let me show you something.
Sure.
This was a gift from a friend of mine in Xinjiang. This is a Xinjiang knife. It's pretty
Wow.
frightening if someone's coming
Yeah,
at you with that.
yeah.
It could do with a clean, but that was a gift from a friend of mine. And it's actually, believe it or not, a left handed knife because I'm left handed. And he went to all that trouble to find me a left handed knife. this is the kind of knife that the Uyghurs would carry. And some of them are longer, much longer. Nowadays, 5 inches is the longest knife you can buy. This
Yeah.
is illegal in Xinjiang now because it's long. The blade is longer than
Yeah.
5 inches, so that's not a legal knife anymore. I think it would have to be about that long to be a legal knife.
Mm.
But yeah, that is the sort of thing that was being done, even when they can't get guns. They're killing people with knives like that. And what happened was it turned out that this was organized from Washington, D.C., and from somewhere in Germany as well, over Facebook. So the Chinese military, People's Armed Police, went to Facebook formally with court orders and warrants and effectively said, can we have access to the information of the people who created this in the groups? And Facebook
Mm.
said no. What? Facebook said no. We're not interested in helping the Chinese government. Now, we're not talking about the Chinese government oppressing people. We're talking about the Chinese government protecting the vast majority of people who aren't interested in terrorism. And we're talking about 99.9%. So the 0.01%, Facebook said, no, we're not going to help you. So Facebook was closed down. Facebook refuses to comply with Chinese laws and therefore is closed down. Mark Zuckerberg came over here and actually met Xi Jinping 10 or
Mm.
12 years ago. And I think he asked Xi Jinping to name his son, and Xi Jinping declined. So
Right.
what happened with Zuckerberg is he said he wanted Facebook to be allowed into China. And China have said, yes, no problem. Here are the rules. And there are several rules. One is you store all your data for China inside of China.
Yeah.
The European Union is trying to do the same thing, by the way. This is not unusual. This is normal. This is protecting your data space. You store your data inside of China. The other thing is you cannot harvest data to make money from it. So Facebook, Google, all of these are harvesting our data as we speak. We're being harvested, and they sell it off for advertising purposes. And the third one was when presented with a court order, you must provide us with the information that the court asks for. And
Yeah.
they said, no, we're not going to do that. Google won't do that. Microsoft won't. Microsoft does do that, actually. Microsoft does. Microsoft is operating in China. I can use Bing as a search engine, but it does block certain things and it stores my data here so the
Right.
government know what I'm looking for. So if I go looking for sedition, it gets pinged up. If I go looking for how to make a terrorist bomb or
Yeah.
where I can go to buy a 12-inch long blade, it will find me. And I, as a user in China, I'm using an authorized, I use a VPN, but my VPN is registered. So they know who I am. When I go on my telephone, my phone SIM card can only be bought with an identification. So I take my passport to the phone office, register, they give me a SIM card. So they know who I am. So it doesn't matter what name I use, I can use your name, but they still
Yeah.
know that I'm Jerry Gray. So that's the thing. It's kind of strict in China, and it's strict for a very good reason because they have had terrorist incidents inside of China. So that's why the Americans are very afraid of TikTok because they don't want what they did to China to happen to them. So this is an accusation that is a confession. So then TikTok said, okay, we get that. So we will do what they call, I think, the Texas Project. And they used Oracle to put all of their data in America, 100%, and
Right.
they firewalled it away from China. China cannot access any data at all. They did that. They complied. But that wasn't good enough because the algorithm still allows, they don't control the algorithm. Douyin does. And Douyin says, if you want to see what's going on in Russia, if you want to see what's going on in Israel, we'll let you. And they can't have that in America because that destroys the narrative. That creates this division that you've got for the thousands, millions of people in America who say free Gaza, for the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands who say Russia aren't the bad guys here, we are. These people are starting to realize because of things like TikTok that America is not a force for good. And other countries that they thought were forces of evil are not actually forces of evil. So now it's all over. But it's not. This is another thing. Um, Donald Trump declared the deal was done. I just put a
Yes.
video out about this yesterday. Donald Trump declared the deal is done. Xi Jinping said, we have no problem with the deal going ahead as long as it meets the needs of the companies concerned. So the CPC don't care about this. They're not interested
Mm.
in this. They've never tried to get information. That was testified to under oath by the guy who was from Singapore, who was the
Yeah.
CEO, not a
Yeah.
member of the CPC, because
Yeah.
he's Senator, I'm from Singapore. I'm not a
Yeah.
Chinese. I'm from Singapore. Have you ever been in the PLA? I'm from Singapore. I served my country. He served in the Singaporean army. I'm not from China. That guy,
Yeah.
he testified under oath that the Communist Party or any other legal body inside of China has never asked for information and it's never been provided. He testified under oath. If that turns out to be untrue, he'll go to prison for a long time because that would be a really, really serious
Yeah.
crime as far as the Senate is concerned. So there we have that situation where China has never been interested. China told Xi Jinping told Donald Trump, this is not China, this is the president of China, and it's on record that we're okay with the deal going ahead as long as it meets the needs of the company. And that is what is happening now. The deal could go ahead, but I don't know if you're aware of this. The algorithm is still not going ahead. There'll be a new algorithm. So they will not get the algorithm that they wanted from this, and 20% remains under the deal that's been proposed, not done, as Trump says, and it probably will get done. The algorithm stays with Douyin, 20% of the ownership and therefore 20% of the profit stays with Douyin, and Oracle has already got all of the data. They're going to now have to pay for that, which they weren't. Douyin was probably paying Oracle to store it. Now Oracle has to pay for it to own it. That's how well Douyin is probably very happy with this deal.
So, so if it's going to be a new algorithm, meaning they can modify the algorithm to show what they want to show or to suppress what they want to suppress, as opposed to what the previous algorithm was. If people wanted to watch Russian TikTok or Russian
Yeah.
videos, they could access that. Is
Caroline
that the case
Caroline
now?
Levitt, the press
Yeah.
secretary, the blonde bimbo, was actually on media yesterday. I saw it where she
Yeah.
said, "We will own the algorithm. The algorithm will be re-educated." She used that word. The algorithm
Mm.
will be re-educated to suit American needs. So, in other words, America's going to. And then she went on to say, American TikTok will access all the world, yeah, but it'll only access the world that America wants you to see.
Wants. Yeah.
So Americans are
Yeah.
being blindsided by this. There's 100 million businesses operating on TikTok. There's something close to 200 million users on TikTok. No government in America, no president would dare ban that. And that's why Biden kicked it down the road. Biden Biden had the opportunity to ban it because it was actually the law came into effect when Biden was still president, and he said, "I'm not banning it." No way, because if he banned it, he would have lost 100 million potential votes. And there's only 75 million voters out there
Yes.
wanted Biden. I think 73 million voted for Trump and 70 something million voted for
Yeah.
Kamala, and it would have been Biden at that time. So when he made that decision, he kicked the can down the road to Trump, who immediately kicked the can down the road for another 90 days while negotiations could go on. America never wanted to ban it. They only ever wanted to control it. And now Douyin
Yeah.
would be very happy with this. They can keep TikTok, but it's called Douyin. ByteDance is the parent company.
Yeah.
Douyin is TikTok in China. TikTok is TikTok in America and the rest of the world. We can still watch Douyin, which is fantastic. It's full of, I mean, it does have the dancing and stuff and the singing stuff, but it's full of science and maths and technical problems, and it's full of educational stuff, and it's great. Now, that is because that's what people want. In
Yeah.
America, they want twerking and they want fishing videos or whatever it is, the hunting videos. They want different things. So the algorithm gives it to them. And then
Yeah.
you get these senators saying TikTok is dumbing us down. No, it's not. You're dumbing yourselves down by asking for more of this. The more you look at, the more it sends you. That's how the algorithm works. And in China, kids are watching TikTok and learning how to do this mathematical problem or this science
Yeah.
experiment. They're learning stuff from it. It's great. And that's what America needs. Until it does, America is going. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy. America is
I
going very
have.
close to
Yeah.
that right now.
I have.
And China is just 60% of Chinese school leavers are going into tertiary education now.
Mm.
60%. That's massive. More than half the kids who leave school go to some form of tertiary education, whether it be university, college, or vocational training. They can learn to be plumbers, electricians, and stuff like that. But they can't work until they're 18, so they're going into college.
Mm. So yeah, TikTok can be a force of good or force of evil depending on how you actually use it.
Well, all social
But
media can. There's no doubt. In
yeah,
fact, the internet can be a force for evil and a force for good.
correct,
It depends how you use it.
correct,
Chinese internet is
correct,
clean. It has no
correct.
misinformation. It gets pulled off. It has no pornography. It's illegal. It has no sedition, no treason, no treason. Nothing that is divisive or seditious. I don't even think. I'm not even sure. Religion. I'd have to check on that. Religion is certainly not oppressed in China, but there are restrictions on religion, and there are basically five religions, and you can't come to China and start a new church. That's what they're
Hmm.
saying. You can be a religious believer, you can go to church, but you can't come and start a new one and profit from it, which is why Falun Gong was banned. They were profiting from it. They were making a new church. They were telling people that you need to donate your money and your savings, and when you die, you've got to leave everything to the leader so he can build a bigger church. And this is illegal inside of China.
Right,
China is a country that's come from poverty. Now, if you take a look at religion, what has religion done to poor people apart from exploiting them? It has impoverished them further. I remember as a kid growing up, we were not rich. My mother used to scramble around looking for change for us to put into the collection box at church. So on
mm,
Sunday morning, she's always, I've got to give each of the boys, I'm one of five boys. You had to give each of the boys a sixpence or something to put into the collection box. And sometimes we couldn't afford it, but mum would find it somewhere. So we were poor. And then the church were taking from us. And what did the church do with it? I'm not sure. But, the Vatican's
mm,
extremely rich, and that was the head
yeah,
of our church. So you can see
yeah,
why China doesn't like that. But China doesn't stop anyone choosing a religion. What it does say is we won't teach it in school. So I'll need to check to see if it's on the internet, Chinese religion. But
right,
there is also a department that deals with religious affairs here, and they prevent churches being used for unauthorized purposes. So there's the restriction.
right,
You can't use a church for anything other than worship. Nothing wrong with that.
right, right. So the basic reason for for America to acquire TikTok was to basically control the algorithm and control the narrative, because most of the corporate media, I mean, that's the feeling I get from, but I'm living outside of America. Most of the American corporate media, they all sing the same tune, different shades, I guess. But yeah, I
Yeah.
haven't seen a contrarian view on the corporate media. You do get different opinions when you watch YouTube, but yeah, when you look at the corporate media, there's hardly any distinction between different channels when it comes to foreign policy.
I used to have a game that I would play with my students. I would print off a Global Times article and I'd print off the same story in BBC. And, we'd look at this story, students, and this is a critical thinking activity. It's quite interesting. You look at this article that the BBC wrote, or CNN or Fox, didn't matter, as long as it's the same story as the Chinese article. And I would ask my students to spot the differences, and then we'd have discussions about why we had differences in there. I have yet, this is a fact, another fact, I have yet to find a lie in Chinese media. Now, what does that mean? There are many things that Chinese media won't tell us about. They won't discuss it. because it might lead to divisiveness, disharmony in society. And they're also not critical of America. Really, they're very uncritical of America, even though America is doing what it's doing to China. I wrote an article once for Global Times. They asked me, "Can you write an article about this topic?" So I wrote the article and I sent it to them. And then they said, "We're not going to use it." Oh, what's the problem? It's too critical of America. What? Hang on a second. This is America that's
Mm.
trying to destroy your country. I'm being too critical. Yeah, they wouldn't accept it. I said, "Well, can I rewrite it?" And they said, "Not really, because it's a great topic. We like it, but we can't use it. It's too critical." So that tells you what Chinese media is like. No sensationalism. They don't have sensationalism here. There's no blood and guts. If it bleeds, it does not lead. It is factual, it is informative, it is real, it is accurate. I have yet to find a lie in Chinese media, but I will say they do omit to tell us the entire truth. They tell the truth and nothing but the truth, but they don't tell the whole truth. That's the
Right.
difference with Chinese media. I can find a lie. I mean, I could go onto the ABC in Australia now. I could go onto CNN, BBC, Fox News right now, and within 5 minutes, I could find you a lie about China. It wouldn't take me a moment. And literally, I could find a lie every single day in almost every media article about China. A lie. And I'm not talking about a misinformation, I'm talking about a lie. And I've done this many times where I've created articles or made a video to explain why and how they lie. And they say China could do this. Yeah, they could, but they don't. China
Yeah.
might do this. Yeah, they might, but they don't. They might be incarcerating 1 million people in Xinjiang, but they're not. They might, but they're not. There's no evidence to suggest they are. And when you go to Xinjiang and you talk to Uyghurs, they're not in any trouble at all. 99% of Uyghurs are honest, decent, very nice people. They're not all Muslims. Many of them are, but not all. And not all Muslims in China are Uyghurs. This is another thing that people forget. Mongols, Tajiks,
Yeah.
Kazakhs, Hui, the whole Hui population are Muslim. I think there's 30, 40 million Muslims inside of China. And you only hear about the Uyghurs. Why?
So what was the reason of the discontent between Uyghurs and mainland China or Chinese people? Why did America think that it would be a good idea to train certain people in that region to go against the mainland
That's a
China?
really good question. A really good question. I've never been asked that one before. So thank you for that. The reason is because of the location of Xinjiang. It is vitally important as a trade route. It is the old Silk Road. Everybody knows that. Now, with the advent of steamships, then the caravans crossing from Persia, the Middle East, or West Asia, the crossings that used to happen and take 6 months, 12 months, had to stop because steamships could do it in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it took. If sailing ships did it, when sailing ships started to come, it was like 6 or 10 weeks to get from here back to London with all the tea, and then from London back to Assam or back to Calcutta, pick up all the opium and bring it in. It was weeks rather than months. So the caravans stopped. And what happened with Xinjiang is it fell into disrepair. And deliberately, not deliberately so, inevitably so is probably a better word, because there was a century of humiliation going on. China was in the East Coast trying to defend itself, losing badly. It was a very weak country. It had its corruption problems, it had its management problems. And what happened from around about the 1800s, before the 1800s, it was still thriving. Back in the 1770s, when America was being formed, the Ming dynasty sent across what's called the Shiba, which are people from sorry, no, it was the Qing dynasty, not the Ming. Qing dynasty sent across from Shenyang, which is in Dongbei, which is the northeast of China. A group of people, I think 4,000 of them, left northeast China and headed to northwest China to protect China's borders. And where they went to was a city near a town near Ely. And their culture still exists there. I did a video about this recently. They still have their own language, their own newspaper. It's the only newspaper printed in the world in this particular language. It looks like Mongolian, but it's not. And Mongolians say, no, that's not Mongolian. But to me, looking at it, yeah, that looks like Mongolian to me. But No, it's not. It has some similarities. So what has happened here is those people, this is 1770, went to protect Xinjiang, which is when it got its name. Before that, it had another name, and the name was in English, Lost Lands Returned. So
Mm,
going back more than 2,000 years, Xinjiang, as we know it now, has been part of China. So this idea of separation, because the Uyghurs didn't even arrive there until the 10th century. So 1,000 years before the Uyghurs arrived, Xinjiang was part of the Han dynasty, going back more than 2,000 years ago. So that's the history of that area. Now, why did America want to destabilize it? First of all, it is the land route to Europe, and trains are coming in now. A train can leave China, and I don't know if you're aware of this, Poland has now blocked Chinese trains. There's a reason for this, and it's another destabilization of Xinjiang. Poland is destabilizing Xinjiang right now. China has sent trains all the way across there, and of course they go into Russia. So Poland is now, as a result of Russia's supposed incursion of drones into the area, Poland are punishing China. The Americans are encouraging this, of course, because it affects business that's going from Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and a few other cities all the way across China to places like Warsaw, to places like Frankfurt, to places like Paris, to getting to the UK. It takes 10 days by train to go to Warsaw. It takes 6 weeks by container on a ship to get to Warsaw. So you
mm,
can see why this is important now. Uh, Xinjiang actually borders 8 different countries. The Pakistan Economic Corridor goes through Xinjiang. Afghanistan is now being developed through Xinjiang. Kazakhstan is being developed through Xinjiang. All of these things are happening, and they are very important to China and China's Eurasian relations, and America doesn't like that. So that's
yeah,
part of the reason. Now, the other reason is massive, massive reserves of oil, rare earths, minerals, resources have been discovered inside of Xinjiang. And now America says, let's destabilize this so they can't get it. The more they can't
right,
get, the better off we are. That's why
right.
Xinjiang is being destabilized.
So at the end of the day, it comes down to money, basically, like everything
American
else.
money,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. So they want to control the resources. But I don't think Americans have much wisdom anymore. They should realize China is almost a superpower, as big as America now, and military wise, it's much more formidable. I know many Americans make a comment that China has never been to war or hasn't been to as many wars as America has been, but that's a good thing. America has been to war since after 1945 almost every year. I think there's
Yeah.
only been a period of 7 years where they haven't been to war after 1945, and they've
I think
spent
it's
like 10,
16
11
in their
trillion
history.
dollars. Yeah,
Yeah.
they've spent like 10 or 11 trillion dollars just on wars,
Yeah.
whereas China's probably been to war with Vietnam for a very short period of time. So
3 weeks in 1979, it was with the
yeah,
approval of the United States. Believe it or not, the United States
yeah,
approved that. They rubber stamped that one. And they went down there to prevent the expansion of Vietnam into Cambodia because Pol Pot was in Cambodia at the time. A year later, Pol Pot was deposed, and the king of Cambodia was actually living in China at the time. His daughter is
mm,
backwards and forwards to China. She speaks fluent Chinese. She grew up speaking Mandarin. She had a Mandarin, a Chinese nanny. So yeah, she's actually very popular here. She's got her own Douyin account. Douyin. She's got her own account. So she's very popular and very nice kid. She's not that young anymore. She's probably 40 or 30 something now, which is very, very nice lady and very popular in China. So Cambodia was being mismanaged. Vietnam was going to take it over, and China didn't want Vietnam to take over Cambodia, so it went into Vietnam. It took 3 weeks. The Vietnamese army pulled back, and it was all done. So there was no occupation. The invasion
yeah,
was very, very tactical. Bang, out. 3 weeks, and it was done. That's the last time that China's military left its borders in anger.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we use that phrase, it wasn't in anger; it was very, very organized and structured. But what did happen? China has contributed to peacekeepers. It has seen action. Chinese military have seen action. They contribute to peacekeepers throughout the world. The United Nations has China as its number one peacekeeping supply. So the
Mm.
military of China put on the blue caps and they go somewhere. So they have seen action, but they've seen action as peacekeepers, not as combatants. Now, in some cases,
Right.
those peacekeepers get into combat. So they do have that. Then, of course, we've got the situation with what happened in Pakistan a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
where India tried to take over or tried to attack Pakistan and it got decimated inside of its own borders. Pakistan
Yeah.
sent up some Chinese aircraft. Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
Five of the Indians went down. So that was something that I mean, India denied that for a long time, but I think it's fairly common knowledge now that the Pakistan using Chinese weapons destroyed India's ambitions to attack Pakistan.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
think there's a worry about what they've done. Now, the other thing that we've just seen, just either yesterday or the day before, is the third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, with its electromagnetic catapult. And that
Mm.
is something that the Gerald Ford hasn't been able to get right yet. They have the same technology. China's got there, it's operating, they've proven it, they've shown it working, made videos of it. And China is saying now, here we go, we now have three serviceable aircraft carriers, and I think there's another two under construction. So America has 11. At any
Yeah.
given time, I think four or five of them are out of the water. They're not
Right.
very. These things are floating cities. Lots of things can go wrong, and of course, as lots of things go wrong, then so they get taken in and repaired. But the Gerald Ford class is still not fully operational, as far as I understand, and that's the last one that they built. And I don't know what's going to happen to America's seafaring ambitions because it's it might be submarines, but even though they admit they don't have enough submarines and they're only building 1.7 a year, China is
Yeah.
building a ship a day. It's
Yeah.
launching a ship
Yeah.
a day, every day. Now that's
Yep.
not all Navy, of course. That's commercial shipping as well. But China is launching a ship a day. America are launching a ship a year. There's the difference. So I don't think we need to worry about China's capability. The other thing is we have in China an extremely capable and very large military force and a massive militia. The militia are very often ex-service people. It's what you call the army reserve. In England, they call it the territorial army. Massive reserve. And we're talking about 1 million people inside of China. And remember
Yeah.
this, China is not going out to attack
Yeah.
anyone. It's staying here to defend everyone. That's the
Yeah.
difference between China. China is not going to attack Australia. I have Australian friends who say, yeah, but China's going to attack us. What? Why? China's not America. America already has occupied you. It has
Yeah.
surreptitiously invaded Australia and it has taken over your finance, your agriculture, your economy. It's taken over your defense department. It's taken over pretty much
Intelligence.
every aspect of your life.
Yeah. Pine Gap. They sort of forget Pine Gap and the coup in 1970s against Duff Whitlam. So I don't
Yeah.
know
Well,
why.
Pine Gap's an interesting thing because I
Yeah.
think Pine Gap would be the only target that China would attack in the southern hemisphere. And in Guam, maybe, maybe not. I don't think it needs to, but Pine Gap it probably does. Now, here's the interesting thing: China will hit Pine Gap with one. Well, they've got this. Don't ask me. I'm not a munitions expert, but they've got this bomb which doesn't have explosives in it. The Russians have used them as well, and what it does is some kind of sound. It hits so hard that it destroys everything, and it doesn't have any explosives. So I don't know how this works. Don't ask me. I'm just not scientific enough. But they have these things stuck to hypersonic missiles. So in an hour, Australia could find Pine Gap disappeared under one of
This.
these
Yeah.
bombs. Now, when that happens, America are blind. They can't see
Yeah.
anything in that hemisphere. So there's not much need to destroy Guam or Okinawa or
Yeah.
Korea, South Korea. There's not much need because those places won't be able to operate without the
Yeah.
eyes and ears of Pine
Yeah.
Gap. So that's
Yeah.
why Pine Gap is possibly the only real target in Australia. And the beauty of this for Australians is that it's very remote and 90% of the people in there are Americans. So you will
Correct.
lose some Australians who guard the perimeter.
Yeah.
Maybe the Australian Federal Police are there as well. You will lose some if this were to ever happen. Now, this is all hypothetical because, in my opinion, America is not going to go to war with China because it's done many, many simulations and it's lost every single time. So it's not likely to go into a war it knows it can't win. And China is not going to attack them.
Yeah.
It's not going to do that. It has no intention of attacking anybody. It is purely 100% defensive. And I challenge anybody to prove me wrong on that. You know, people talk about what about the expansion to the South China Sea? And I say, what expansion? Do you know
Yeah.
that the South China Sea only has two airstrips and neither of them have ever been used except for one occasion by military? There was one occasion, and it was more than 10 years ago, where a military plane landed to take off two people who'd been injured in an accident and take them to the mainland hospital. That's the only military plane that's ever landed there. The Paracel Islands has 1,000 people living there, and only 100 of them are soldiers. You know, this is Woody Island has. If you go on Wikipedia, it says many of them are soldiers. They're not. They're people who work in weather. They're people who work in radio. They're people who work in communications. They're not soldiers. They're not there to defend or expand. They're there to check. We've got a typhoon coming through here now. How do we get the information? It comes from our weather reporters on these islands that have been developed. And here it is again, this famous word China could use them for military purposes. They could,
Mm.
but they don't. There is no need to, because China doesn't want forward bases. What it wants is defense. And what it does have in the military people who are on those places are in listening stance. They're listening to see if submarines are coming through, to see if aircraft are coming across. They are just there to defend the borders of China. That is what the militarization of these islands is. And then people say, yeah, but what about Djibouti? Well, 20 countries are in Djibouti, including the Americans. And China was invited to join this force for anti-piracy in Djibouti because China has the most to lose and the most to gain if there's no pirates. So where else are they military expanding to? Tibet? Come off it. What's the threat from Tibet to you in Australia? Xinjiang? No, they're not. The military is not in. Well, the military is in Xinjiang because it's a borderland. Lots of Xinjiang borders, places like Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, where there have been problems. So, yeah, there are military bases there. And yes, there are rocket bases in that area too. So they send up
Mm.
satellites from there. They tested the atomic bomb in Xinjiang as well, in a place called Lop Nor, which is now a camel sanctuary. They don't test atomic bombs anymore. It's a camel sanctuary. So camels roll wild through this old atomic bomb testing area. I've cycled through it, so I've seen camels there. Interesting place.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's always easy to make peace and grow together rather than fight with one another and then get destroyed because war and fighting is not beneficial to anyone.
Well,
And
if you take a look at anything Xi Jinping has said on the global stage, anything he's said on the global stage, it matches exactly what you just said. Cooperation,
yeah,
not confrontation. It trade, not conflict. And that is what
correct,
China does. It has a
correct.
history. You know, people talk about the threat to Asia from China. You know, the Philippines could be invaded any time. China's been here for 5,000, well, it's been here for a lot longer, but the borders we recognize as China have been here 5,000 years. And the Philippines didn't just suddenly move in, they've always
Yeah,
been there. And we've never, I say China, have never
yeah.
attacked the Philippines, ever. America has, Spain has, the United Kingdom has, Japan has. Japan occupied them during the war, America took over. This is projection of their own sins onto a country that has not committed them.
No, China has never invaded any country in its 5,000 or more than 5,000 year history. Even if you read the history of China from Western perspective, they do admit China has never invaded anybody. They've always grown through trade. And it was
Yes.
sort of the trade surplus that they had with the Europeans that got China into trouble because they started bringing in opium to offset the trade surplus because they would take cotton from
Well,
China and China would
another
sell
thing
so
that we don't
much.
hear
Yeah,
about, there's another aspect that we don't hear about. China steals from the West the IP that China steals. How do you think India and Ceylon got tea? Tea wasn't growing naturally in those places. It was
yeah,
stolen from China. So even when the trade disputes back then, we're talking about 150 years ago now,
yeah,
those trade disputes in the 1840s, where
yeah,
China said, well, you can have all the tea and we'll take the silver from you
yeah,
because that's what we want. And the UK said, no, no, we don't want to give you all our silver. The silver's, we'll give you something else. But instead of doing trade, Britain stole tea. They stole silk. So Sri Lanka and India have got silk production now.
yeah,
It came from China. They've got tea production. In fact, in Sri Lanka, these are the only two, basically the only two things that they have. I was in Sri Lanka last year, and they said, yeah, our two biggest exports, tea and silk. Where did they come from? Said my wife, who is Chinese.
yeah,
Oh, we got them from China. And there's a whole museum dedicated to this guy called Monroe, who is the guy who stole the tea from China. So
yeah,
again, we're talking about IP theft, theft of technology. No, China is not guilty of that. The West are guilty of that. So they were stealing stuff before they even addicted China to opium.
I think so. China has had border disputes with India, so they're fighting over there, probably once a year or something like that. But those are small skirmishes. Other than that, yeah, I agree. China hasn't had any major fight with anybody, which is a good thing. I mean, that's how nations should grow in
It's
peace, I
it's not
guess.
even once a year, and I don't think.
Yeah,
Again, another thing people probably don't realize: those areas, the areas, local areas of control, the LACs, they don't have weapons. Sorry, they don't
hmm.
have guns, firearms. They have weapons. They have sticks, and they have quite nasty-looking tools to hit the enemy with. But they've had in the last 5 years, they've had one conflict, one.
Right.
And prior to that, I think it was in the 1960s where they had a major conflict. And do you know why? Again, this is not China and India's fault. Neither is Tibet. Half of Tibet was taken by the British government,
Yeah,
who drew a line and said, this is India and that's China, or that's Tibet and this is China. And so
yeah,
even they were trying to separate Tibet from China. And it was the Dalai Lama who invited China's military to come in and take those lands back. The peaceful liberation of Tibet from the British who had invaded Tibet. The British really did
yeah,
invade Tibet, and then they drew lines, which it was called the McMahon line, Small c Mahon, the McMahon line. We can look this up if we want. And it drew a line through the middle of Tibet and said, this is India and that's Tibet. And the
mm,
Tibetans said, not really, that's actually ours. And the Indians said, no,
mm,
it's ours now. So the Indians took it over. And that is why the disputes still exist. The British did this. China and India don't
yeah,
have a dispute. Both have a dispute with the British, creating this dispute.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, it does
yeah,
happen. But also, Wang Yi, the foreign minister for China, was in India a couple of weeks ago. Modi was in China a couple of weeks ago, and they have decided. Now, watch this space, because now that China and India have decided to settle these disputes amicably, America will say we can't have that.
yeah,
And now we have already Assam, Kashmir, Punjab. All of these places are going through color revolutions because
yeah,
the Americans are funding them, because they want to destabilize Modi now, because Modi is becoming less compliant. The biggest democracy in Asia, the world's biggest democracy, is now saying, well, we don't really want to follow this line. We want to deal with Russia. We want to deal with China. And we're okay with dealing with America if America wants us to, but America doesn't. It only wants you with us or against us? And China
yeah,
said, Russia says, India says, we don't need that. So we're going to see I think probably we'll see India as part of BRICS, but it's not part of the RCEP.
Yeah.
and it's not a member of ASEAN either. India and China can't be members of ASEAN because they're nuclear powers. So that was set up deliberately to stop China from trading with these. But ASEAN is China's largest trading partner now. So all of these things that go back historically, America has done everything it can to stymie China's growth. China has continued to grow and is continuing to grow. China's GDP is nowhere near as high as America's GDP, but China's purchase price parity is much higher. I
Yeah,
think it's
much
about
higher. Yeah.
20 years ago that
Yeah.
China overtook.
They
The other thing
surpassed
that
it
China
long
has
time
got that
ago. Yeah.
America, yeah, America
Yeah.
has no savings.
Yeah.
There are investments, but there are no savings. China
Yeah.
has, I think it was 80 trillion. It's a
Yeah.
huge number of
Yeah.
savings. During COVID, here's a really interesting fact. During COVID, the Chinese people saved into their bank accounts 1 trillion US dollars because they couldn't spend. We were kind of restricted
Yeah.
and we couldn't spend it. So they saved 1 trillion US dollars. Wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty impressive. This is why BlackRock would love to get into China and can't, because China
Yeah.
says, yeah, you can come into China, but these are the rules. If
Yeah.
you don't comply
Yeah.
with our rules, you ain't operating in China. That's what caused Jack Ma from Alibaba his problem.
Yeah.
He wanted to circumvent the rules. He wanted to do mini micro loans, but he was happy to take the loans and the profit, but not take the risk. So he was lending
Mm.
money to people who couldn't really afford it. And when they didn't pay, the banks had all the risks. So that had to stop.
Right.
That's why the Ant Finance thing collapsed and why Alibaba kind of pulled its horns in a little bit and said, we're not going to do this. And Jack Ma went off to do what he was going to do in the first place, teach. He went to Japan as
Right.
a teacher, and everyone says he disappeared. No, he didn't. He just went to do what he said he was going to do. And he's back now. He didn't
There's a
disappear at all.
very there's a there's a video of Jack Ma with Bill Clinton where Jack Ma, just on the savings point, Jack Ma is talking about how Americans love to spend tomorrow's money, whereas Chinese love to save, save, save. Yeah.
Yep, he's right.
Yeah. So
I did some
that's a
research on this. It was about 10 years ago, maybe more. And I found that Americans spend 112% of their income on average, and Chinese save 60% of their income on average. Now,
mm,
and my wife, classic example, we've got we've got hundreds of thousands of RMB saved because she's worried
that's
about the
good.
future.
Yeah.
Everybody in China worries more about the future because of the past that they've come from. They've come from
Yeah.
poverty. They've come from high costs for low returns. They've come from a very, very hard background. And so, yeah, of course, it's inevitable that would ingrain a culture into you of protecting yourself against that happening again. So yeah, we've saved up a lot of money. My wife and I both worked for years, and we saved, and I'm still saving money now. I get a pension, and I get my income from YouTube, and occasionally I write an article and get paid. And this is how I live. But we're
That's
able to
good.
save a few thousand RMB every month. I'm 67 years old,
Yeah.
and at some stage I'll just say, no, I'm going to stop this now, and then we'll live off that saving
Mm.
and my
Mm.
pension, of course, and her pension when because she's younger than me. She's only 51.
Right. 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 As long as there's good social network to fall
Well,
back
that's
on,
the
I
thing
think.
for
Yeah.
China. Until recently, there hasn't been. There is
Right.
now. So the young people coming through will get the good social network. The people who are my age, not really. They're living on their last year's income. When you retire, you come off the taxation system, so you don't pay tax. Most people in China own their own home, which is great. It's like 80%, 100% equity. So 80% of people in China own their own home. We don't pay property taxes. There's no rates. There's no rateable value of the property. So I actually own another apartment, which I bought. My mother passed away 10 or 12 years ago and left me some money. And I thought, what am I going to do with this? I bought an apartment. So I've lost money on that apartment because of the property market crash, but that's okay because I haven't sold it. So I haven't lost anything until I sell it. If I sell it, I will lose some money, but at least that money's just been sitting there and it's not being used. Now, the apartment is not rented, and there's no point because there's hardly any rental market. Most people own their own homes. So it's not
Right.
rented. and therefore it sits empty. And I just got yesterday, I got my bill. The entire costs of keeping that apartment for 2 months in July and August came to me yesterday. It was 28 RMB. That is
Mm.
less than five. No, it's a little more than $5 Australian, less than six
Wow.
Australian dollars. Yeah,
Wow.
for 2 months of the total cost of owning that apartment. Now, I'll just sit on that apartment until such time as either the government say you've got to do something about this apartment, or more likely what they'll say is we want to buy your apartment to knock it down because it's an old building. It's a
Yeah.
65-year-old building. It's the same age as me. And they'll knock it down and build something else. And when they do, they'll buy it off me at market price. So,
Right.
yeah, I'll just wait and see what happens. So that's
Right.
China. Living here is a very, very easy thing to do. You can live on vapors. Most people here live on 1,000 or 2,000 RMB a month, and 1,000 RMB is $250. So give me
That's
$500, and I will live
right.
well in this country.
That's really nice. And did you have to spend too much time learning the language, Mandarin, or? Uh,
My language skills are still functional.
right.
I'm not fluent at all. A lot of people laugh at my language skills. A lot of people think I don't speak Chinese. I don't know why they think that. 很多人以为我不会说中文，我不知道为什么，他们不认识我。So they don't know me. I don't know why they think I don't speak Chinese. I don't speak fluent Chinese at all. But yeah,
Right.
I've learned the language to get by. I can order food. I can get directions. I can have a conversation. I call it taxi language. If I get into a taxi, the driver goes, "Oh, I've got a foreigner here." He says, "Sorry, I can't talk to you." And he says this in Chinese. And
Yeah.
because they're quite friendly people, he says, "Oh, sorry, I don't speak your language. I only speak Mandarin or Cantonese or both. Usually it's both. If they're local, it's both." And I say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We can speak Chinese if you want." So, oh, 没关系，我们说中文好不好? And he says, "Oh, you speak Chinese? Well, this is great." And then he says, "Where are you from?" I said, "From Australia." I always say I'm from Australia now, even though I'm from Britain originally. I'm from Australia. "How long have you been here?" 21 years. "Wow, your Chinese are so good." These conversations go on. And then 10 minutes
Right.
later, I get out of the car and he thinks this guy's fluent. If I get in a car and go all the way to Guangzhou, which is an hour and a half's drive, the guy's going, "This guy can't speak Chinese at all." So yeah,
Right.
I can get by with the how long have you lived here? Are you married? What do you do? I'm retired. Yeah, the basic fundamental questions, and no problem at all. And
Right.
if I want to go out and do something, I can do it. Most of my foreign friends, not all, quite a few of them speak fluent Chinese. But most of the friends that I hang around with most of the time, I'm the speaker because they say, "Well, you do it, Jerry. I can't do it." They're usually because of people my age or older. And if they're older, they haven't really bothered to learn. I had no choice. I
Right.
had no choice but to learn some. Uh, I got very hungry in the first few months I was here because I had to eat in KFC or McDonald's because I
Yeah.
could point and say, "I'll have a number three." I'll have a set meal here, or what they call it, uh, the pack where you get a Coke,
Yeah.
fries,
Yeah.
sometimes I say, "Can you change the Coke for a coffee?" And that was as far as I could go. You point at that and go, "I want coffee, coffee," because the word for coffee in Chinese is cafe, so it's easy
Yeah.
to remember that one.
Yeah.
不要可乐, cafe. Okay, there's no problem. So I could do stuff like that. That was how I started learning Chinese. And I'd go into restaurants in my first few months here, and I'd only go into restaurants that had pictures on the wall or pictures on the menu.
Yeah.
And then I'd just point. And of course, the moment you point at it, they have other questions. Do you want noodles with it or do you want rice with it? What? Do you want it spicy or not spicy? What? I don't know what you're saying. Just give me that one. And that was
Yeah.
how I got my food. And sometimes I get it too spicy. Sometimes I get it not spicy enough. You had to learn, and I did.
So how do you talk to your wife? She
Oh,
speaks
she's
English, I
totally
assume.
fluent in English. Totally
Okay. There you
fluent.
go.
She's
There you go.
fluent in three languages:
Wow.
Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. And I
Okay.
mean, totally fluent. She understands nuance. She understands sarcasm. She understands my humor. She's brilliant. She is really, really good.
That's
Yeah, we
nice.
don't have a single problem. Now, I do know people who are married to wives who don't speak the language, and one good thing, you never have an argument with your wife. You just go,
Yeah.
forget it. So that's one good thing. But generally speaking, you do really need, and especially if you have kids. I had one friend who works a lot. He runs his own company, and he had trouble communicating with his son for a long time because his
Right.
son spent all the time with the nanny and his mother, and he would come home after the son went to work, went to bed, and he'd see him in the morning at breakfast time, and for years hardly ever communicated with his own son. And so his son got to 5 or 6 years old without being able to speak English, and he wasn't good enough to
Mm.
speak Chinese, but it was Cantonese, not
Right.
Mandarin. So now the son's about 9 years old. He speaks English, Cantonese, and Mandarin.
That's good.
So he's okay now. But yeah, it was a little difficult for him to communicate with his own son. That's a problem. But I've got other friends who have kids they speak Chinese to their mum. I have a brother-in-law he's half Italian, Italian Australian. He would speak Italian to his children.
Mm.
Mum would speak Cantonese, and they would speak to each other in English. So the kids grew up learning Cantonese, Mandarin,
Yeah.
Italian, and English. They
Yeah.
now live in Australia and they only speak English, and they're going to lessons to learn Mandarin. Sad.
Right.
But yeah, for the
Well, that's
first few
good.
years of the older boy's life, he was, as a 3, 4 year old can be, as fluent as a 4 year old can be in four languages.
Right. That's good. It's always good to know more than one language, I guess. So, how did you get into cycling? I wanted to ask you that, but I forgot because you've
Oh,
cycled a
yeah.
lot.
I wanted to lose weight, simple as that. And I decided to ride. I thought I'll give myself a real challenge because I don't like to do things in halves. And I decided to ride to Tibet.
Mm.
Unfortunately, Chinese law, foreigners can't ride to Tibet. And the
Mm.
reason is not security, it's not anything like that. It's because Tibet is dangerous. And they're saying, we don't want foreigners dying on us. So to go to Tibet, I have to go. I can't go by road. I have to go by in a group, and I have to go by train or plane. I've been to Tibet, and it's actually called Xinjiang now. So we're not supposed to call it Tibet anymore. But I've been there, and I've found that all the stories are just that, stories. There is a massive Buddhist population. There's a massive
Mm.
Tibetan population. They're freely wandering around everywhere. And they say, "Oh, well, they only took you to the same place." Well, yeah, but I was able to walk around Lhasa and Linja, two different cities that I went to, and I was able to interact with local communities. No one stopped me. And when you're on the bus going from one town, one city to another, you can look out the windows, you can see people aren't oppressed. I have, because of my qualifications, I have some degree of psychology, mostly workplace psychology training. And workplace psychology isn't really that much different to behavioral psychology. And when people are oppressed, you can see their behavior and you can't see it. So anyway, that's Tibet. I got into cycling because I wanted to go to Tibet, and I ended up going to Xinjiang instead, which is where I got the Xinjiang story narrative from and realized that I'd been totally misled about it. Now, I had my suspicions because I don't trust Western media about China. Even then, 2014, I didn't trust Western media about China. I had been to Xinjiang once before, but it was before the Troubles back in 2005. And I didn't see any hostility. I didn't see any aggression. I didn't see anything other than poverty. It was very poor. And it's not anymore. That's another thing that China has done. Westerners capitalize on China's poverty. So China removes the poverty, so the capitalization doesn't exist anymore. So I started cycling there. I rode from the border of Macau in the southeast of China to the border of Kazakhstan in the northwest of China. And I connected it to a charity that we've been involved in. We raise money for disabled, mostly disabled athletes, but disabled community inside of Zhongshan. And I finished the ride, and we raised a couple of 100,000 RMB, like 270,000 RMB or something like that. And that's quite a, I mean, in China, that's a lot of money. It's what it was, 50,000 Australian dollars. So that was quite nice. We did that. And then people said to me, "What are you going to do next?" I don't know. The following year, my wife walked from here in Guangdong province to Beijing. It's 2,500 kilometers. And it took her 4.5 months. And her challenge was to raise more than me. And she did. So she's kind of quite proud of that little competition that we had. And then a couple of years later, I was saying that I felt like my ride to Xinjiang wasn't really complete because I didn't ride back. I flew back and shipped the bikes home. And she said, "Well, why don't we ride there? Why don't we fly there and ride home?" And would you do that? Yeah, yeah, we'll do that together. So we did. We flew up to Xinjiang and we rode home. So I've actually ridden several thousand kilometers inside Xinjiang. It's huge. It's as big as France and Spain together. And when you go all the way across it, it takes a long time. So I've seen a lot of Xinjiang. Now I've been back. I've been back twice this year, and I've seen a lot more of it. I've been to a different part of Xinjiang. There's basically two cities now that I want to go to that I haven't. One is Hotan or Hotan, where the jade comes from, and the other is Aksu, which is further up in the north. I haven't been to those two cities. We've been to a lot of places in Xinjiang. I've seen high levels of security. I've seen no evidence whatsoever anywhere of any oppression of religion, oppression of language, oppression of people. It doesn't exist. Xinjiang is totally free. Now, anyone can go online and find this. You go on Google and say Xinjiang videos. Now, you have to cut through the crap because it's full of Western narratives. You know, Google is not a good place to search. But once you cut through the crap, you'll find hundreds and hundreds of videos on TikTok, on YouTube, on Facebook, all from Xinjiang. You'll find my videos, a couple of my videos on Xinjiang, which all show this. Now, you could say to me, "Oh, but it's a big Potemkin village, you know, the village where they just fake everything." Well, yeah, you could, but the fact is, you can't do that when you're cycling through it. No one can hide from me what I'm going to see in the next village and the next village and the next village. You can't hide that because that is you can't make it all into a stage show. So, you know, you do go to restaurants and you see them dancing and you see them playing their music. And yes, that is staged. It's staged for the tourist. Of course it is. If you go to you want to go on an outback holiday in Australia, you'll get Aboriginals showing you how they live and how they eat. That's
Yeah.
stage managed for you. It's not real life. But if you were to just cycle across the outback, you would see what it's like. Now, in the case of China, that's exactly what I did. I went to see for myself. And I didn't go to the tourist spots. When you cycle across China, you can't use the highways. You go off the highways onto the low roads and you go through the villages. You go through these tiny little places, hamlets with 40 houses, and you actually see the people in their real environment and the mosque on the corner and the people going in and out of the mosque. And you know, sometimes the mosque is dual purposed. It's a shop and a mosque,
Yeah.
stuff like that. I've got a great photograph of it's called a Wujing store, Wujingdian. It's a hardware store in the middle of a mosque. Beautiful mosque with green towers and stuff, and there's a hardware store right in it. And then people say, "Oh, look, they're oppressed. They have to put their..." No, they're not. They're just using some space. It's just the way it is in China. You just use the space that you've got. My father-in-law's
Yeah.
house has
Exactly.
a shop on the ground floor. It's not my father-in-law's shop. He rents
Yeah.
it out to someone else.
Yeah.
That's the way
Yeah.
it is.
No, that's true. That's true. There are mosques in Melbourne. So there's a praying room in Melbourne University. So it serves as a reading room as well. When people are not praying, you basically try to utilize as much of the space as you
Yeah,
can. Yeah.
every single university that I've been in China, and that's quite a lot, has a halal canteen. Everyone.
Yeah.
I've never been to a university. A lot of companies, large companies, have
Mm.
halal canteens as well. Uh, the company that I worked in, I've only worked in one company. I've worked for a lot of different organizations, but one manufacturing company didn't have, but it only had 200 employees. And I don't know. I don't know if any of them were Muslim, but so
Mm.
they didn't have. But they had Mongolian working there, Mongolian lady, very nice lady, who was a PA to the CEO. They had quite a few ethnic minorities. I mean, they're not restricted in any way, shape. In fact, if anything, ethnic minorities get a better deal than the Han Chinese. There might be, in some cases, that's the only place I see resentment. You know, why do they get better treatment than us? You know, we're the Chinese,
Mm.
they're the ethnic minorities. But they do accept that the ethnic minorities have been oppressed in the past. The CPC does not oppress them, it elevates them. And
Mm.
this is another thing, all ethnic minorities were excused the, let's call it one child policy. It's actually called the family planning policy. they were excused that and allowed to have as many children as they want. I've been in Xinjiang and seen families with 10 kids. That's quite common.
Wow, that's a
And they
lot.
were living
Yeah,
in poverty. That's why they had 10 kids, in case some of them
yeah,
died. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. Well, Jerry, thank you for talking to me. I've taken so much of your time. There's so much to talk about. I'm really
Well, we could
fascinated
do
by
it
the rise
again
of China after. So I'm really
if your
fascinated by.
if your
Sure,
audience wants has some questions, ask the questions and
sure.
bring me back on
Oh,
if you want. I
definitely.
have
I
no problem with
definitely
that.
plan to bring you back because I want to. I mean, my understanding of China's rise post independence is based on the books that I've read and some of the videos that I've seen. But I'm really keen to understand from someone who lives in China. What was the drive behind China's significant and rapid economic rise, technological rise? Other countries have also been colonized: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Nepal was never colonized, but it's still in the same economic sphere as the rest of the countries in the Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka. What actually drove China's rise, and not just rise, a rapid rise to economic freedom and and become a technological lead? That's something that fascinates me, which is why I was asking you when I was sending you email, if you can tell me about some good Chinese economists who I can talk to or I can read their books. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'll do some more research on that as well, but definitely plan to bring you back to talk more about that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you want to talk about economy, get John Ross on, the
Yeah,
guy I mentioned. And if you need a connection to him, I'm connected. I can help
that
facilitate
will be
that.
great. Yeah.
There's another guy that you might want to talk to as well who works in CGTN radio. He's an American guy called Jason Smith. Jason has
Right.
just published a book, very well worth reading. I've got a copy,
Hmm.
but I didn't pay for mine. I got a signed copy as a friend. He is a good friend. I've met him several
Right.
times. He lives in Beijing. I live down here, but we've met. And we're in the same groups together, and we kind of help each other. You'll see him, Shengan Jai, Joe. I'm not sure what his name is. J1 Shengan J1 on Twitter. I can send you that link.
Yeah.
What he does is he finds all of these little projects that China does around the world
Yeah.
and how they do them. So some of them are donated, some of them are interest-free loans, some of them are deals, barter and trade. His favorite one, he told me, was that they built something in Ghana, and the cocoa beans or cacao beans, chocolate, the payment was in chocolate. So they did this, built something for the country, and the country paid them in chocolate. So stuff like that, which China does quite happily. And China needs to buy chocolate, so instead of
Yeah.
buying it, it builds you a school or a hospital or a parliament building. It's great how they do it. Jason has got his finger on the pulse with literally thousands of them from about 150 countries around the world. And
Wow.
he's a good guy to talk to about China's growth
Wow.
too. He works with
Wow.
CGTN,
Definitely.
and he's happy to
Yeah.
do interviews. So yeah, he's another good guy.
No, thanks for that. Thanks for the tip. I'll definitely try to contact him. And so this has been a very useful discussion with you. I love talking to people from different regions. So yeah, I've learned a lot from this conversation,
Good.
especially about China. And I do plan to bring you back to talk more about China. I'll let you go now because I've taken more of your time than I intended to. I know
That's
you're a
no
busy
problem. I
person.
don't have any appointments, and we're not going out today. We're being hammered by a typhoon
Yeah,
as we speak. You
because of the
can't hear it, but
typhoon.
it's
Yeah,
arrived.
yeah,
Yeah, it's arrived.
that's
We're
all right.
getting pretty torrential rain and some wind out there now, and
Right,
it's gonna really hit us in a couple of hours. So it's just
right.
getting the beginnings of it. So yeah, we're not going out of the house. So this was a great way of filling a couple of hours. So thank you very much,
That's
Ali, and
great.
thank you to your
No,
audience.
thank you
And
for
I
your
hope you get
time.
lots of
Yeah,
good questions.
yeah, that's all right. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay.
I think what President Trump has promised to do is go in there, negotiate with the Russians and Ukrainians, bring this thing to a rapid close so that America can focus on the real issue, which is China. That's the biggest threat for our country, and we're completely distracted from it.
You know, I ask ourselves, what has the globalist economy gotten the United States of America? And the answer is fundamentally it's based on two principles: incurring a huge amount of debt to buy things that other countries make for us. And to make it a little bit more crystal clear, we borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
Same question to you. Would you allow Chinese firms to build critical U.S. infrastructure?
No, I would not. And I spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader had by the time we left office. This is a guy who doesn't have a democratic with a small d bone in his body. This is a guy who is a thug who, in fact, has 1 million Uyghurs in reconstruction camps, meaning concentration camps.
This thing of a trade war, they've been in a trade war with us for 25 or 30 years. But we're at war with China. I think the #1 thing you're going to see out of the trade war is the orientation of the complete supply chain of Japan, Western Europe, and the United States and Southeast Asia, that 800 million people, even before you get to India, okay, around the freedom-loving countries. I think the regime in China is in deep trouble. Remember, this is different than the Chinese people. The Chinese people are some of the hardest working and best people in the world. It's this regime that has led them down this path, and it's this cult of personality around Xi that tried to get up in the United States' face. This trade war is going to end in victory, and what you're going to see is a reorientation of the entire supply chain out of China.
China is the existential threat to the industrial democracies in the West, just not the United States, but the industrial democracies in the West, including Japan and South Korea. And that's why this is going to be the defining issue of President Trump's presidency.